morning. Forget about history, traditions, places in history, famous old faces and political records. Forget about traditional constituencies, old faithful lobbies and old allegiances. In the world of 21st century politics, the voters out there could not care less. You would be forgiven for thinking that this was an analysis of election 2011. But as Frank well knows, these are in fact the words that he himself used to describe the impact that the breakdown of traditional loyalties had on Fine Gael in 2002. Indeed, there is no doubt that the Irish political landscape has been changing for some time. The combined share for the two civil war parties has been declining constantly, from 90% of the vote in 1937 to 80% in 1973, 73% in 1992 and 53% last February. Voters have become more volatile and perhaps more discerning. Parties have become less able to assume a certain level of support simply on the basis of which side one's father or grandfather was on in a conflict that took place nearly a century ago. Fianna Fáil's electoral success at the 1997, 2002 and 2007 elections masks some of this weakening of traditional loyalties because we picked up voters and attracted transfers from outside our traditional support base at a rate that we had never previously achieved. But of course this cuts both ways, as Fianna Fáil discovered in this election, when the party found itself deeply unpopular and on the wrong side of virtually every issue. We could no longer rely on a substantial core vote to carry the day. Indeed, every time a new opinion poll came out, showing our vote down further, there were many in the party that thought, well, at least it can't go any lower. But of course it did. It went lower and lower and lower again. So, in some respects, election 2011 was virtually remarkable. It was certainly a record-breaking election, as Frank has pointed out. Fianna Fáil's record low share of the vote meant that it was the first election since 1927 that we did not win at least one seat in every constituency. Fine Gael won a record number of seats, although it did in fact fail to exceed its all-time high vote of 39% won under the late Garret Fitzgerald back in 1982. And Labour also entered the record books by becoming the leading party in Dublin for the first time. So following this record-breaking election, Fine Gael and Labour have an unprecedented majority in the Dáil. I think it's also interesting to note, and a positive development in my view, that a majority of the TDs that were elected to the current Dáil were not members of the previous one. Although, from my own point of view, despite this, I still didn't quite manage to make it there. However, in some respects, one could ask what really changed in election 2011. Despite all the turbulence, 73% of the population still voted for the three parties that have dominated Irish politics for decades: Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Labour. In addition, despite many predictions of a new political force emerging that would shake up the system, no new party really challenged popular support. One of the dominant themes of the election, no doubt, was public anger. In an RT exit poll, 36% of voters cited the feeling of being angry or let down as the primary factor that influenced their vote. And I have to say, as a candidate in the last election, I didn't need to wait for the opinion poll to hear that. I knew the reaction on the doors during the campaign, and while there was a lot of uncertainty, I think, until the last minute, and the opinion polls show that about where voters intended that they would go, in fact, 40% of people made up their mind in the last week, which was really remarkable. It was a huge shift from previous elections where 20% decided in the last day how they were going to vote, and a further 20% in the last week. So there was certainly I was getting a lot of uncertainty from people about what they intended to do, but it was clear, it's fair to say, that I knew that they weren't going to be voting for us, and I understood the reasons for that. I think it would be wrong, therefore, for anybody in Fianna Fáil to think that our vote collapsed simply because of a breakdown in traditional loyalties. Nor should we assume that just because the voters went for similar centrist parties in this election, that they would automatically turn or return to Fianna Fáil when this government becomes unpopular. For the first time in our history, Fianna Fáil cannot take its continued existence or even relevance for granted. I think it's particularly worrying for the future that the RT exit poll showed that only 1 in 10 voters under 25 voted for Fianna Fáil on this occasion. And while we got 17% of the male vote, only 13% of women supported us. And the tally showed us getting only 8% of support in Dublin, putting us 5th place behind Labour, Fine Gael, Independents and Sinn Féin. Indeed, our greatest level of support was among old farmers from Connacht, and our lowest support was among young people, women and those from Dublin. So I suppose, as I'm neither male, elderly, I'm a farmer, or for Connacht, this is particularly encouraging for the future. But I do think that there are causes for some optimism, and 2 of those in particular stand out for me. Firstly, Adrian Kavanagh, who's a lecturer in politics in NUI Maynooth, has done an excellent constituency-level analysis of the election, and this showed that, in fact, just a 2% swing towards Fianna Fáil at the next election could see us regaining seats in most Dublin constituencies and the rest of Leinster. There were a lot of places where we were fighting for the last seat, so we weren't that far off taking it. So a small swing leaves some scope there to come back. Secondly, the other area that would give me some cause for optimism is Micheál Martin. Now, I know it will come as no surprise to you to hear a politician praise their leader, but I genuinely do believe I genuinely do believe that Micheál is one of the greatest assets that our party has right now. I think that he has both the vision and the dedication for the long, hard road back to electoral success. It's clear that it was certainly, and again on the doors, it was apparent to me during the election that people liked him, and I thought it was one of the most remarkable and probably inexplicable parts of the election, that when people were asked who did best in the debates, that he scored far higher than any of the other party leaders, which was strange given that they weren't supporting the party, but they did relate to him, they did think that he was worth backing. So that Micheál's personal popularity obviously didn't help us to win the election back in February, because I think the decision to punish Fianna Fáil had been made long before the election was ever called. But I do think that it bodes well for the future. And Micheál has also taken to the task of rebuilding the party organisation with incredible gusto, holding meetings all over the constituency, spending 3 or 4 nights a week for the last 2 months, going around to different parts of the country, and particularly listening to our members, because certainly the voters are very upset with us at the last election, but I found the people who were most hurt actually were the ordinary members of our party, people who had given their free time, who had worked, who had given everything to the party over a long period of time and felt more let down, I think, than anybody else. And I think it's a hugely important exercise, and Frank would know from the task that he undertook with Fine Gael in 2002, to go around and listen to your own members and get back in touch with the grassroots is a huge exercise, but it is a demanding one, and I think it's good that Micheál has put the energy back into doing that. A lot of it is unseen work, but it's incredibly important. He is also, and I think this is important, he is committed to modernising our party structures, to welcoming new members, to embracing new ideas, and in particular to running new candidates. And in fact, I suppose if we take one thing from the ashes and look for an opportunity, I think the fact that we have so few incumbents now in the Dáil means that the next general election provides Fianna Fáil with a unique opportunity, not only to rejuvenate our own party, but also politics generally. And our leader has already announced that we'll be running one candidate under 30 in every local election ward in 2014. And it's also our aim not only to meet but to exceed the proposed legislative requirements on female candidates. Now, of course, it's not good enough, I suppose, just to have good candidates. They must be backed up by the right policies. And I'll talk in a moment about where I think the party's policy priorities should be. But firstly, I want to acknowledge that I understand and I appreciate that our overriding challenge, I think, as a party is to restore people's trust, because I think without that nobody even wants to hear what we have to say. And part of that is responsible opposition, and I think it is making sure that whatever happens over the next few years, that the party puts the country first and is seen to do that, and whether that means casting aside the opportunities for short-term political gain and for point scoring, but doing what's actually right for the country and letting people see that that's what we're about. I think that's hugely important. But I also think that ethics is an area that we need to seriously address as a party, because while breaches of ethical standards occurred in almost all parties, we must recognise that Fianna Fáil, more than any other party, has been associated with the worst of those breaches. And an absolute commitment to upholding and being seen to uphold the highest ethical standards must be non-negotiable for all parties in this island. But for Fianna Fáil, this is doubly so. In the new Fianna Fáil, our moral compass must never again be thrown off by the magnet of loyalty. In the new Fianna Fáil, there can be no place for anybody who thinks that it's acceptable to claim expenses from their holiday home. In the new Fianna Fáil, there must be no place for anybody who thinks it's acceptable to carry around suitcases of cash, to give loans to their friends from party funds, or to refuse to answer reasonable questions about their rather unorthodox financial arrangements. Turning to policy, I genuinely believe that there is space for a party in Irish politics of the reforming centre-left, and I think it's interesting that Frank actually clearly stated that Fine Gael sees its place on the centre-right of politics into the future. And I think that there's room for a party that's not blinded by an inflexible and abstract ideology, but underpinned by real values and a zeal for challenging the status quo. Fianna Fáil has been and is still first and foremost a Republican party. This doesn't just mean that our aim is a united Ireland, although that is part of it, but it also means that we're committed to Republican principles of liberty, equality and fraternity. And for me, that means parity of esteem for every Irish person, be they male or female, gay or straight, black or white, rich or poor. I grew up on a council estate, and I was the first person in my family to finish school. But I was lucky, and by the time I was in my late teens, I could already see that there were opportunities opening up to me that had already shut down for my two older brothers who'd left school early and for a lot of the people that I grew up with. So the reason that I got involved in politics, I was lucky enough to get a place in Trinity College. And while I was there, I decided that I wanted to get involved in politics because I wanted to work for everybody, to have real opportunities, regardless of where they live or how much money their parents make. I'm not from a political family. My parents still have very little interest. So I've no natural ties that would draw me towards any particular party. But I joined Fianna Fáil because it was the party that most closely resembled the type of values that I was looking for, and argued for the kind of politics that most appealed to me. Fianna Fáil, when I was a teenager, and what it meant to me, Fianna Fáil people didn't just talk about tackling poverty. They were involved on the ground in the poorest areas, working with communities to improve people's lives. They were the party of the ordinary working class dub. And while other parties thrived on pitting different sections of Irish society against each other, Fianna Fáil had long moved beyond an outdated and restrictive model of class politics. Their policies were influenced as much by the aspirations of those who wished to better themselves as they were by the fears of those who were struggling to survive. While others sought to make disadvantaged communities angry about their lot in life, Fianna Fáil was determined to give them the tools to improve it. And their emphasis on education as a vehicle of social opportunity was the thing that actually most appealed to me, I suppose, coming from my own particular background and the fact that education in my own life has been the silver bullet that has given me opportunities way beyond those that I grew up with. And while other parties seem to be either pro-business or pro-labour, Fianna Fáil realised that you could and that you should be both. The party realised better than most that the best way, earlier than most, that the best way to help ordinary working people was to get them jobs. To get jobs was to create a pro-enterprise environment. We see success as something to be proud of, not to feel guilty about. I joined Fianna Fáil because I saw it in my community as being the party of the aspirational classes, prioritising work over welfare and promoting education as a vehicle of social opportunity. And while I appreciate that these are not the values that people now associate with the party that cut the minimum wage, for me, it's my aim to bring Fianna Fáil back to that. And that will be my key goal, and it is, I have to say, most of the ordinary members of the party over the next 10 years. That's always what we were about, and for me, that's what we're going to be about into the future. So returning to Glenties in 10 years' time, What questions would we ask ourselves to evaluate the claim that in 2011 the Irish political landscape changed forever? Evaluating future trends of party support will be one way to measure change, but for me the extent to which real change has occurred will depend on the answers to the following three questions. Firstly, I would ask whether political culture has changed so that more people are voting on policy rather than on personality. Election 2011 delivered mixed messages in that regard. According to the exit poll, the percentage of people who voted on the basis of a choice between the policies set out by the parties almost doubled from 24% in 2007 to 41% in 2011. However, the proportion whose main concern was to elect somebody to look after the needs of their local constituency stayed virtually constant at 37% in February 2011. Secondly, main question I think we should ask ourselves in 10 years' time is there greater gender balance in the Oireachtas and in local government? And are our elected representatives drawn from a wider range of backgrounds? Because to me that's central to achieving real change. I guess as a woman replacing one group of men in suits, with no disrespect to anybody here, with another doesn't represent a real change for me. I think you need to have a genuine mixture of people from different backgrounds, from different professions, and I think it's crazy that in the history of the state we've never had more than 15% of our politicians being female. For me that's a huge loss to Irish democracy, and I welcome the fact that the government has set out targets for parties to address that. And final question is, I would ask if individual legislators have a greater role in the Oireachtas and a real ability to hold government to account. Our own party's proposals on reform of the Oireachtas actually received the highest marks during the election by reformcard.ie, an independent group that analysed all the parties' manifestos. And we would be encouraging the government in their own work over the next few years to really advance proper political reform to ensure that the Dáil in particular is more effective and moves away from, I have to say, during the election as well, and I think it's why there was so much confusion and people couldn't decide what they wanted till the end. I think there's a huge sense of apathy and disillusionment with politics in general, where people have real problems in their daily lives, but they turn on the television and all they see is politicians kind of scoring points off each other, or trying to get kicked out of the Dáil to get on the telly and all that kind of stuff, and it demeans politics. I think we need to show them that the Dáil works effectively, that the government is really being held to account, and that their local TD has a genuine opportunity to influence national politics and make a real difference at that level, rather than just fixing the pothole on their street. So to conclude, I think it's too early, like Frank, to say if election 2011 has heralded a permanent change in the Irish political landscape. There's still a lot of uncertainty and opportunity. However, I think one thing is clear. In the future, no party will be able to assume a certain level of support simply because of their history. Every party will have to fight for every vote. That's a fundamental change compared to how politics has operated for most of the lifetime of this state. But personally, I think that that's healthy for democracy and very challenging for political parties, and that's the way it should be. Thank you.